Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Yapping with YUCCA podcast. I'm your host, Sofia. Today, we have some members of our New Mexico No False Solutions Coalition, which is a coalition that YUCCA has been a part of. We were a co-founder a couple of years ago. So I'm going to pass to our guests to have everyone introduce themselves and share a little bit about your role in the coalition.
Guatsi Hopa. Hi, everybody. My name is Alicia Gallegos. I'm from the Pueblo of Acoma and the Pueblo of Laguna. I am the climate justice organizer for Pueblo Action Alliance, and I have been with the organization for a little while now. I started out as a youth fellow in their fellowship program in 2022 with the Cultivating Roots and Resistance Fellowship, and as of last year, I got hired on full-time. So now I'm a staff member of Pueblo Action Alliance, and we are one of the orgs that's a part of the New Mexico No False Solutions Coalition. And yeah, just happy to share what we have gathered and want to get out to everybody today.
Yeah. Thank you all for having us. My name is Alejandria Lyons. I get the pleasure of being the coalition coordinator of the New Mexico No False Solutions Coalition. And right now, our steering committee consists of folks such as YUCCA, Pueblo Action Alliance, as well as Los Jardines Institute and Indigenous Lifeways. And we have a wider network of folks across the state, individuals and organizations that are fighting to combat, quote, false solutions. So solutions that are not true climate solutions. They don't help us get anywhere towards any real targets. The coalition kind of started in 2022 when YUCCA simultaneously, when other folks in our network like Pueblo Action Alliance were looking at hydrogen and the way that our current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, was promoting this as a way to hit our net zero goals. We fought really valiantly in that legislative session. And since then, we've just been, that kind of like watchdog looking at, these quote false solutions, these things that are just going to hurt New Mexicans at the end of the day.
Yeah. Thank you, Ale.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Zoey. I'm with YUCCA, and I work as YUCCA's communications manager. I feel like I don't have too much else to add about what the coalition does as a whole, but definitely really excited to have both of you on today and to be able to talk through the work that the coalition has been doing since it was founded, and also some of the big fights that we have coming up, and how folks can get involved. So excited to have y'all on.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. So we talked a little bit about what the coalition is and what false climate solutions are and why we're fighting against false climate solutions and for real climate solutions. Our coalition is preparing to take a trip to New York City for Climate Week this year. And one of the big fights and one of the reasons we wanted to talk today about New York is because of Blackstone. So can y'all tell us what is Blackstone and why should they be on everyone's radar here in New Mexico?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for just, letting everyone know, this is a really big announcement, but also a really important time for us, coming from New Mexico, being from indigenous communities, being a Pueblo person, and taking the time to travel to New York City for the annual Climate Week, where there's going to be, UN gatherings and spaces. So leaders from all over the world coming together to talk about climate change. And so just us showing up there, I think is really important for us to, confront people, especially corporations like Blackstone, and to show our faces and be these are the people who you're putting on the line and who you're saying aren't worthy of a healthy environment, of drinking water, of a livable future, really. And so when it comes to Blackstone, we're targeting this corporation specifically because they are, a global corporation that manages over $1 trillion in, they're called alternative assets, I think it's called.
That sounds right to me.
Okay. Yeah. I have my notes here, but like it just feels weird saying these words.
I know. They don't feel like real words.
They don't. Like it kind of sounds like tech bro language or like finance bro language.
is,
but
yeah.
we've had to kind of like prepare ourselves to be able to talk about these things, even though it's not really like it can seem separate from climate, but we are really drawing this connection due to Blackstone's recent announcement this year to purchase PNM, which I know Ale is pretty well versed in, like that announcement and what that means for New Mexico. But basically, Blackstone is just a really huge corporation, one of the top ones globally because of how much assets and money they manage, and they have investments and own companies locally in New Mexico that we should be aware of. And they've also been trying to get into New Mexico's energy sector for like the last few years that I know our coalition has been kind of keeping a little bit of an eye on, but hasn't really fully like announced to be like, we're targeting this person and this company. So that's what we're doing this year. And yeah, so I hope everyone can follow along and also do your own research too if you feel that push to dive in deeper with us.
Yeah, thank you. We've talked about kind of New Mexico being an energy sacrifice zone on the podcast before, and how we've talked about, you know, things like public power and utility justice, and how electricity at this point in our time is a human right and should be a human right. So PNM is, you know, one of the major electricity utilities in New Mexico. Most people in New Mexico, if you pay an electric bill, you're paying to PNM. So yeah, Ali, can you tell us about the Blackstone merger, acquisition, takeover of PNM?
Yeah, we had a really good discussion about that. I think that the delineation that folks are making in our monthly meetings is we're building this analysis, like Alicia is saying. So like what you were saying, the language is important, especially in a lot of these kind of climate wars, because it is at the end of the day, since our world is very digital and run through media, it is important for us to say that it is an acquisition, it is a takeover, a total takeover of the Public Service Company of New Mexico. On August 25th, PNM petitioned the Public Regulation Commission for this takeover, this acquisition to happen. And so now it is on the lap of the PRC, or the Public Regulation Commission, who it's been a dwindling board. The governor appoints the Public Regulation Commission. I think that's really important because it went from being a 5-person board to being a 3-person board, and they get to make a lot of decisions based on our utility system. And so, like you guys have talked about, you know, public power is important, and Blackstone buying out PNM furthers us away from getting closer to that goal. Because like as Alicia mentioned, they're one of the world's largest asset managers. Mm-hmm. They're going to be accountable to their stakeholders, and they're purchasing not only PNM but Texas A&M, which provides energy utilities to not just New Mexico but also some folks in Texas. Mm-hmm. So this is really huge because right now, you know, PNM as we know it is like a publicly traded company. But this kind of acquisition by Blackstone furthers it, that they're going to be, you know, and then we look at private equity, because that's what Blackstone is they're a private equity group. What private equity does is, we've seen this happen with things like Joann's. We've seen this happen with like other, you know, beloved things that private equity comes in, they try to downsize, they kind of make the companies or whatever inefficient, take as much money as they want, and then they kind of just leave. They cut whatever it is there. And so to think about that on the scale of our utilities and our energy sector, especially in a place like New Mexico that is an energy sacrifice zone, and we are water scarce, this is really scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you say to folks who are confused about this? Like, where do we start? This seems like such a big fight, right? Like these utility companies that most of us, you know, we have no choice but to pay our electric bill if we want to have electricity. What do we do? How can we stop this?
Well, I think it's important for us to hold conversations about energy democracy because this is not a done deal. PNM wants this deal to be done by 2026, but there still are motives of us to continue to fight, to engage in that narrative war, right? That's why we're going again to New York Climate Week. I think it's important for us to talk about this company's offenses. Some other partners have talked about how they have labor offenses. They do run some energy systems in places like in the state of Ohio, and that's nuclear energy. And I think that we shouldn't give up and tune out. I think that we should actually fight harder to have more of these discussions and these town halls because this is not a done deal. As corrupt as we may say the PRC is, they still have to, have a vote and a hearing. And so I think that it is worth a fight. And I think that we should at least try to go down fighting this and continue to harm the company's reputation because they do have a lot of offenses in many sectors, not just energy, including agriculture. They own a lot of things. And I think that right now, with the way the tides are turning to critique billionaires and people buying out our basic needs of life, the fight in New Mexico is really important.
Mm-hmm. So we talk about no false solutions and why this fight is kind of the role of our coalition specifically, because our coalition fights against things like hydrogen production, carbon capture and storage, or CCS. And we talk about that as a false solution because ultimately it just upholds the fossil fuel industry. It's not actually curbing climate change, even though it's framed that way. And we've as a coalition, we've done a lot of fights against hydrogen specifically. We were able to stop the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub from happening here. So can y'all tell us about like why we consider hydrogen, CCS, projects like that to be false solutions, and how Blackstone is connected to hydrogen specifically too?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the work that we do with the No False Solutions Coalition and really like keeping an eye on all these fixes for climate change, but also transitions away from fossil fuels to like renewable energies, which, with the work that we do, we end up learning that it's, like you're saying, it ends up holding the fossil fuel industry in some way, extending the life of that industry, I guess. But it also still continues to put our communities here at risk while also commodifying things like our air that we breathe and the water, the clean water that we do have. Let's see, like, the earth itself, like soil, with all these false solutions, we know that there are things that exist that are like a part of carbon offsetting schemes, which are also linked to like getting states to net zero promises and things like that. So I don't know. I think it almost feels pretty simple, like to say that if it's putting a price tag on our like, what we deem as sacred, the water, air, like I've been saying, the earth, and even animals at sometimes, then we know that it's just a part of like a financial mechanism, which are, I guess they're called like market-based mechanisms. It's just really a part of a larger scheme to continue making money while still putting life in harm's way. And when it comes to Blackstone, we've been looking into how they are definitely connected to the introduction of hydrogen energy to New Mexico. And I've made some notes, like just of the timeline of like how we can keep track of the different moving parts that Blackstone has in New Mexico. So when we look at in 2020, Blackstone led a variety of investors to purchase tall grass energy. And so Tallgrass Energy is another company that's been in New Mexico, and they've been trying to create a hydrogen power plant in the Four Corners region. With the hydrogen power plant, there's a lot of, not really proven to scale technologies involved with that as well. And then I think one of the first things that like kind of alarms people in their head when they first hear hydrogen energy is water. And you're right to assume that this would be highly water intensive. More on Tallgrass. But with Tallgrass, they're another energy infrastructure company, and they have plans to convert old coal plant into hydrogen power plants. And this would also require building a pipeline through the Four Corners area of New Mexico, and more specifically the Navajo Nation. And so in 2021, they announced to convert the old Escalante generating station, which was coal powered, and they wanted to be hydrogen powered. And this would be the first conversion of its kind. So this is kind of like continuing that legacy of like experimental energy transitions and technologies here in New Mexico. And so let's see. Oh, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to add, Alicia, because we actually went to New York several times before this last one to speak to Blackstone specifically about Tallgrass. We never got to speak to anyone, even though we had requested. But so one of the other reasons we went to New York was to hand deliver to Blackstone the chapter resolutions that Tonajoneane had collected essentially against Tallgrass Energy, who was promoting hydrogen. And this is a major violation, right? Because I think that some of the other analysis folks have been saying about both Blackstone and Tallgrass, because I do think it's appropriate to talk about them both in the same breath, is to look at their past practices. And what we've seen with their past practices is they don't really care about free, prior, informed consent. They don't care about communities, especially those tied to the land and culture, because they were the company that was offering $25 gift cards to listen to a hydrogen presentation because they wanted it that bad. It's just gross.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, too, in terms of not only Blackstone, but private equity as a whole, right? I think one of the things we really want folks to understand is that what's going to happen after this, acquisition isn't a mystery to us, right? We already know not only from the history of Tallgrass in New Mexico, but also from the history of private equity coming in other places, what this is going to do to our communities in terms of raising costs, in terms of not just hydrogen, but other water intensive projects, right? Things like AI data centers that Blackstone also has a history of investments in. And so when we think about like the impact of private equity coming into these systems that should be controlled by our communities and where our communities should have the decision-making power as a whole, one of the other things that I think we are really trying to push back on is this idea that it's okay for billionaires in New York to be making decisions for communities here in New Mexico that they don't know, that they don't understand, and that this is really counter to all of the work that the coalition as a whole has also been doing, fighting back not just against false solutions, but also for these community-centered solutions that would advance energy democracy, that would advance a true just transition that is equitable. This is really like the antithesis of that and the opposite of what we're hoping to see on a larger scale as well.
Yeah, so Blackstone also has something called the Blackstone Energy Transition Partners, which is a $5.6 billion private equity fund and business that they claim is focused on, quote, helping energy companies build enterprises at scale that can deliver cleaner, more reliable, and more affordable energy to meet global needs. New Mexico even invested $100 million into this fund under the Martinez administration. So can y'all tell me from your perspective, why is that a red flag? And what does it show us about the dangers of these public-private partnerships?
Yeah, so I think hearing that is pretty alarming, you know, just already seeing the types of relationships that we're seeing being upheld between the private sector and so-called public sector, just because of how like we've seen things play out within these last couple of years. And I feel like that's kind of what I can speak to the most, because that's been like my involvement in the No False Solutions work is as of like 2022, and really seeing how the private sector will kind of like infiltrate or buy out like our local leadership at the state level and other levels like tribal governments or counties, cities, things like that. So what's coming to mind too is just how when we see these partnerships evolve, then we really see how our state leaders will focus on like maintaining things that are false solutions, because that's where they're getting money from. And then we'll see them take us down a path where like, this is our pathway to a renewable future. This is our pathway away from fossil fuels. But like we said earlier, it's still connected to that industry, and it's just really all about the money. And I think another thing I wanted to bring up too earlier was how in 2021, we have a quote from that came out of an article that was published by the Santa Fe New Mexican, and they really did a good job of like breaking down Blackstone's history here in New Mexico. The article is called "Blackstone's Bid to Take Over PNM," and they actually did say in 2021, Michelle Lujan Grisham praised Tallgrass Energy for pushing a clean energy future. And so I think that for us, it was just like made it click, like, oh, it has been bought out by industry and is just really like appealing to industry needs, the private sector. And then that was the same year that our coalition worked together to stop the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub, which was when our state governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, applied for a federal grant, which was $1 billion to create a hydrogen hub here in New Mexico. And so that was like my initiation into this work, and how these last few years, and maybe even beyond that, we've been really seeing this private industry try to buy out our local leaders at the state level and other levels as well. And since then, since our coalition did a really good job at fighting that and opposing that federal funding so that we do not see hydrogen energy here, we've been seeing different bills in our state legislative session that are trying to create tax incentives for private industry that are related to like net zero language and that are related to renewable energies. And it's just crazy to see our governor is still trying to push this agenda and kind of really just disregard what our communities have to say and what Indigenous people have to say when we say that we don't want to be a sacrifice zone anymore. We don't want to be a place where these experimental energy technologies come to create things that have never been created before, or produce at a scale that hasn't been proven to work. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And I feel like that's another piece of why we're taking all of this to New York, too, in terms of not just the public-private partnerships, although that's like a huge piece of it. It's also the idea that I think a lot of people have that, right, a blue, like Democratic-led state, right, is a leader on climate. And I think that some of the message we're bringing with us to New York is that's actually not the case. And from the perspective of the communities that live here, our voices are being excluded from the conversation in favor of these private partnerships and deals that center solely on profits and extending the life of industry. And so I think that's another big message we're trying to send by kind of bringing things to the national scale and trying to uplift this fight against Blackstone specifically, but also against these partnerships in general and the harm that they cause.
Yeah, thank you. Can y'all talk more too about how Blackstone has investments in things like housing and healthcare and other industries like that? How does that show us that this fight is bigger than just climate?
So I think in some of the research you came upon, Alicia, you found like some specific chains like Jersey Mike's, the Hilton hotels. So, you know, to me, these are like smaller assets, but good money-making assets. Let's see what else. Team Health. But this is in a way, this is a move by private equity in general to move towards utilities. You know, BlackRock also is moving towards purchasing locally based utilities. Blackstone itself has bought other, First Energy, I think is the company in Ohio. And this is kind of like the next kind of corporate takeover, right? We've seen the corporate takeover of our federal government that's been happening since Citizen United and, you know, all those things during like the Bush administration. And I think that utilities is just kind of that next frontier in their minds, because these kind of folks are like businessmen that are looking at these things in the same way that I think we would talk about manifest destiny and how that has affected us as the front on climate, right? That these are actually kind of lies. And I think that possibly in a way, folks like Blackstone do believe that they are greening the grids, that they are bringing clean energy. But we have to remember the definitions that they are working with are those that our governor is also promoting, which is the hydrogen technologies, the net zeros, the carbon offsetting, the forest programs if we just grow enough trees, they'll sequester enough carbon. And so these companies like Blackstone really do see themselves as making our energy systems better. They're making them greener. They're taking them off fossil fuels. And I think it's important in this moment for us to have that clarity, because that's one of the reasons how we got here, right? I don't think that PNM wants to do clean energy. That's why PNM is not the good guys either, right? Because they benefit from the oil and gas industry in New Mexico. And I think that Blackstone, in the same way that we've also seen with the Chevron fight, you know, they're trying to rebrand themselves too, like as the human company. And I think that this is important, that we keep the narrative in New Mexico that we have self-determination, you know, even as, you know, this might be kind of controversial, but if we look at Kit Carson, I think Kit Carson was wonderful. I don't think it needed green hydrogen to keep going, but Chevron really wanted it, right? And I think that that's a good example of like people have solutions. They have actual renewable clean energy, right? And even though that doesn't really talk about like the fuel chain of solar panels and all that, right? But if we look at solutions that people in New Mexico have made, they've been able to do it without private equity. And I think that we have to keep this through line, because these companies are buying up utilities, and this like monopolization of like our basic needs is gonna continue.
And I think that's one of the key points as we head to New York for Climate Week, is there's all these opportunities to intersect these movements right now. And, you know, because of their variety of investments, and there's actually been a lot of organizers working against Blackstone for a while now, especially as it pertains to the like property ownership that they have, like the real estate things, and they're just like driving up the price of living for people renting. You know, I'm not well versed in that area of organizing, but it's exciting to see that this is a moment for us to connect with those folks who are, and really learn about the fight that they've been in for a while. And so as we head to New York Climate Week, we're connecting with all these groups and really making sure that this is an intersectional fight, and that we're educating each other, and that we're in solidarity with each other. So yeah, that's one of the things I'm looking forward to as well, is just making those connections and establishing those relationships with people, and really introducing our young people to everyone doing this work. You know, we're in it as young people, but it's like, let's connect fights like across states and across all these different like backgrounds that we're working with. And so yeah, that's just another thing to look at.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like, it shows really that all of our enemies is the same, you know, like, for example, Chevron, you know, like they're an oil company. They're contributing to climate change. They pollute communities all over the world. And they're also actively investing in the genocide in Palestine. Like, all of the problems that we're all facing, whether it's housing, environmental destruction, healthcare, it's the same people committing all of these things. So exactly what you're saying, like when we go to New York or when we meet up with everyone, like we're fighting the same fight, whether it's climate justice or social justice or housing justice. It's the same fight against the same people and the same companies whose only goal is profit. And I think that's important to say too, is like when we think about public-private partnerships, like on paper sounds great, like Blackstone's mission, it says they want to fight for our communities, but like corporations only ever care about profit. And that's something that we all need to really internalize, like whether they say that or not. Like when the government partners with these private equity funds, they only care about profit. Yeah. Thank you guys. So in terms of, you know, coalition building and movement building, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about like what a real just transition away from fossil fuels to, you know, energy justice, climate justice. What does that look like to the New Mexico No Fossil Solutions Coalition, especially compared to what Blackstone is trying to sell us?
I think when thinking about the future and this move towards a just transition, you know, I think it's definitely, like Zoe was saying earlier, like the antithesis to what Blackstone is proposing, where they're just prioritizing profits over everything. Definitely wouldn't be that. Well, that's a place to start. But also just, you know, like as a Native person to so-called New Mexico, it's just, you know, a really like community oriented and like localized, I guess you could say like localized solutions, basically. Like there's not going to be one solution that fits everybody. Definitely going to be specific to like communities and geographies, what makes sense for your area, and yeah, so would not entail like the commodification or financialization of our water, of our air, of the earth, of our plant and animal relatives, because that's really like the way that it's going right now, like at the global scale, when we're looking at what's being talked about in spaces like the COP conferences, the convening of parties, like they're looking to Indigenous people for solutions, but they're kind of like altering it in a way that still is prioritizing profit. Like I still can't get over some of the carbon offsetting programs that are being pushed out, where they're like saying, oh, this whale can sequester this amount of carbon, this squid, or this, you know, this tree, all these things. And it's like, oh my God, like they're really just trying to make money off of anything that is existing on this earth. And so when we're looking towards the future, you know, it's not going to be something that we're used to in this current system that we're in. You know, it's going to be something totally different, which is why we encourage people to be creative and think outside of the box and be open-minded. You know, we don't have to work within this system and within like these, I don't know, this way of thinking that has been forced upon us for all these years. We can go back to real indigenous solutions that prioritize our health and that prioritize reciprocity and balance with our natural world. You know, we're a part of it. We're not like owners of it. You know, we're a part of the ecosystem, and we have to live that way. We can't be thinking that we need to have dominion over everything living. And so, yeah, and I think another pathway to moving forward is remedying the harm that has been done, especially in New Mexico, and especially to our indigenous relatives all over the world. You know, indigenous people are on the front lines of the climate crisis, not because we want to be, but because we're forced, and that's forced upon us, you know, with climate change causing people having to relocate. It's causing, you know, death all over the world. And so, yeah, definitely remedy the harm that's been done, and we cannot repeat that as well. You know, there's a lot of people suffering still from past, you know, extractive economies that have existed here, and they haven't really gotten any justice for that. And so it's like we cannot be saying yes to all these projects and new technologies when our people are still hurting from the past, when our land is still hurting from the past. So yeah, we won't stand for that type of commodification. We won't stand for that type of sacrifice, and we don't want to see our people being thrown under the bus in the name of profit and production.
Period. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I appreciated what you said, Alicia. And I went to the, like, okay, what is the definition of just transition? Because this is an important conversation too, right? Like the definition of just transition has been co-opted, just like everything in energy and climate has been co-opted. But if we look at the definition of just transition through folks like the Just Transition Alliance and one of the first writers, Tony Mazzocchi, or Mazzocchi, and it's very simple. It is a transition that it creates a clean and livable future for our communities, and that it creates clean and equitable jobs. And I think that that's an important part of the conversation, that now people are starting to talk about labor, and they're talking about this too, because especially like in New Mexico, you know, a lot of the oil and the petroleum and kind of the energy sector jobs they've been dirty jobs, right? And a just transition would mean that everybody would have peace, that it would be essentially a regenerative economy, one that doesn't take the lives away from people. We see this happening a lot, especially in the Permian, because who has those jobs? It's a lot of folks who have been doing it for a long time, but it's also folks with different statuses. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of first generation or newly arrivant folks. And we're seeing that those communities have also been under attack, because especially if we look at the like diaspora of folks who are coming from the rest of the Americas, from Mexico, from all the rest of the global South, they come here to make a living. And unfortunately, one of the ways that you can make a really good living, unfortunately, is in the oil fields. Mm-hmm. I don't know if folks have watched that cheesy show like Oilman or whatever, or Landman. I think it's Landman. Mm-hmm. And they talk about that. And they talk about, I'm either going to have to sell drugs or I'm going to have to be an oil worker. And I think that it's important for us that work in climate justice to realize that, because if we really want to create a just transition, we need to make an economy that is going to be, people are going to be able to make what they need. They're going to have clean, livable communities, and that we can give the reparations back to those who have paid for the economy that we're living in now. So essentially, economic justice, racial justice, and environmental justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. We've talked a little bit in a past podcast episode about like reliance on oil field jobs. We interviewed some folks from Carlsbad who like their families worked there and got a lot of health issues, or we've heard a lot. There's a group called Somos that did a research study on undocumented oil workers and how they're so much more at risk for injuries and never seeing accountability, because when you're undocumented and you get injured on the job, who are you going to report that to, right? Like the company's not going to do anything. Like maybe they'll pay you out, or maybe they'll just do nothing, or maybe you'll die on the field. Like that's just the reality. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Just transition is a big concept, and like you said, Alicia, it's different for everywhere.
A lot of the YUCCA crew was having a really similar conversation as this in terms of what a just transition looks like. And one of the things we were talking about also is how a just transition has to be creative, and it has to be something that really allows us to imagine and envision a world and systems outside of the ones we're currently living in that are inherently harmful and that are built on profit and exploitation. So with that, I think a lot of it's about building these alternative and regenerative economies. And also, while we're doing the work to do that, proving and showing our communities and workers who maybe are working in the oil fields and folks who are just trying to make a living and make ends meet, that we also are capable of supporting our communities in a way that makes this possible. So I think some of the work that YUCCA has done in the past around like mutual aid efforts and those kinds of systems that kind of show what can be possible on a larger scale when we really come together across the labor movement, across the movement for affordable housing, across the environmental justice movement, to recognize that all of these fights are the same, and our success all depends on the success of each other in terms of actually furthering a movement and a transition that is going to be equitable for the folks that are most impacted. Yeah.
Thank you. Can y'all talk about how our coalition is, building power to fight back against Blackstone in New Mexico, but also, looking ahead to Climate Week and beyond that? Like, how are we building exciting things?
One of the big things is that we felt that it was really important to, have a delegation, a part of the Make Billionaires Pay March in New York, because that's kind of the big push this year. Trump is supposedly going to be speaking at the UN, and Blackstone is actually on that route. And so I think that our folks have a lot of speaking engagements that are going to take place during New York Climate Week of Action to elevate that. We will be hosting actually a fundraiser this month to raise awareness. It's not just a fundraiser, it's also an education event. We do a lot of educational organizing. That's kind of the center and the heart of, how we conduct our work, because we feel that the best way to organize is to create a base, but the best way to create a base is to have educational activities. And so all of these are kind of educational activities. Our group has also collectively been on the radio a lot. Folks are sending op-eds. And so, New York Climate Week is one national stage where we're bringing the messaging, but we're hoping to work actually with other sectors, bringing folks together who are not just in the environmental justice movement, or not even just in the utilities movement, right? We're organizing, planning to organize or cross-organize with some other groups because we want to get as many folks out, getting on the ears of the PRC to know that this is not what we want, and continuing that large narrative on social media and face to face, right? That Blackstone is bad, and these are the reasons why. And so, we're doing a lot of narrative work, a lot of educational work, but New York is just the start.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, too, in the meantime, if folks are looking for ways to plug in more directly to the Blackstone fight right now, I think, like Ole was mentioning, the biggest piece right now is spreading the word in the spaces that you're working in to your, loved ones and friends and family, how harmful this could be for our communities, and also that this is something that's proposed in the first place. I know that I've talked to a lot of folks that aren't quite as plugged in like environmental justice and movement work, who had no idea that this was something that was even going on in the background. Mm-hmm. And so I think helping to educate folks around you right now, so that as we build momentum around this fight and take this to New York and kind of kick off this larger scale fight against Blackstone, we have our communities ready to come along with us. And so I think that's one of the important ways that folks can help to spread the word right now.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a big part of the work too. And that's why I really like working in the coalition, because of our priority to educate our community. We know that not everybody can be like in the know of what's going on all the time. Who are the names? Like, what are the dates? Where do I show up? And all these different things. So that's why we try really hard to make it accessible and bring it to community. Even just having the conversation of like, hey, did you hear that this like mega corporation wants to buy P&M? Mm-hmm. I've been saying that a lot lately to people. Like anytime I'm out and about and I'm like catching up with somebody, I just throw it in there and it's like, hey, right. Did you hear about this? And even though I might not like have like a whole like 30-minute sit down ready to go, I'm just like quickly like, yeah, it's happening and it was announced this year. You should check it out, look into it, because that goes a long way. Like you're saying, like not everybody always knows. There's so much going on all the time. And I think I hear people say that all the time. There's so much happening. I don't know what to keep up with anymore. Mm-hmm. Or you're just busy like living life. You have to pay bills. You have to feed your kids. You have to do all these things, go to work. Mm-hmm. So I think that goes a long way. And, if there's something you're really passionate about, like, organize an event or like connect with us, because we do offer trainings for our communities, like whether it's an organization or you want us to show up in a specific like town or village, like we'll be there to provide this information and what false solutions are. We'll do a whole breakdown for you, because that's a whole part of what we do. Mm-hmm. We do trainings. That's what we offer. We're here as a resource to our community, because that's who we are in service to. We're not in service to any politician or any corporation or company. It's for our people. And I think that's what was really inspiring to me. So I'm actually organizing an event for my home communities back home in Laguna and Acoma to really talk about what this stuff is. And, maybe I won't have time to really go in depth about who Blackstone is, but I'm like, just keep an eye on our work. And if something is of interest and on your radar as a red flag, like you can connect with us and we'll work it out with you. Like we'll catch you up with what we're doing and who we're connected to and all those different things. So that's a huge part of doing community-based organizing. Just those little things,
Yeah, totally.
and taking the step forward to just be like, oh, well, maybe I can do something at my hometown or at my school or, different things like that.
Like around the table with your family.
Yeah, even totally. At that scale, like that's so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like what you said about like, people have to pay their bills and live their lives. And like, that's why we need to talk about this, is because who are you paying your bills to? PNM here, like everyone
who's it gonna be?
Mm-hmm. Everyone who pays bills to PNM deserves to know what's about to happen and deserves to know how they can try and stop it. And the PRC is supposed to listen to us. So this is what we're doing. Yeah. So did you all want to add anything else about how listeners can plug in and support either the coalition's work or the fight against Blackstone? We are having a fundraiser this weekend. This episode probably won't be out by the time that happens. So if you're listening, we had a great fundraiser. And is there, any other ways folks can plug in and support?
So our coalition has a website. It is nofallsolutions.com. That's a really good way. There's some ways you can get in contact with us. Through there, you can also, if you want to be an individual or if you're part of an organization, we have monthly meetings every first Tuesday at 2:30 Mountain Time. And that's a really cool way to just hear about what's happening, because it's true, like it's hard to know what to focus on. But through our coalition, especially with a name like No False Solutions, it gives us the kind of banner to hold all of these things that show like these are the antithesis to a just transition. So our website, we also are we try to be active on Instagram. Our handle is No False Solutions. We are on Blue Sky. That doesn't get updated all the time, but we're also there on No False Solutions. And I think that's about all the social media we have.
Yeah, and definitely follow up on there, and we'll be kind of live streaming some of the events we attend while we're in New York, so you can follow us that way if you're not able, I know not everyone's gonna be able to show up in person. That would be asking a lot. But that's one way you can kind of see what we're up to while we're out there and the places we show up and different things like that. And so we'll most likely be live streaming that on our social media platforms as well, on Instagram and YouTube even. We do have Blue Sky, TikTok. We're almost on everything at Pueblo Action Alliance. So yeah, you can follow us on there and see what we're up to. And we'll continue to keep everyone updated as things move forward.
Yeah, thank you. So in the description, we're going to link all of this information, all of the websites we mentioned, the Santa Fe, New Mexican article, all of the research about Blackstone. I think we did this last time we went to New York too, but we'll probably have a post-New York Climate Week webinar and some social media content to kind of tell folks what happened, because I'm sure some things will happen in New York. So yeah, stay tuned. Do you all want to add anything else before we close out?
Back off, Blackstone billionaires.
Yeah, back off.
Back off. We're not for sale.
Yeah.
New Mexico, not for sale. Stop CO2 colonialism.
Period.
Came out and ripped hard today.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're watching the video, if you're not watching the video, we're pointing to our t-shirts that say New Mexico, not for sale, and stop CO2 colonialism. The coalition's shirts and branding. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining. This was the Yapping with YUCCA podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.